Welcome, everyone. This is your unofficial welcome to the 30th National Pesticide Forum, and you'll get your real welcome a little bit later on this evening. My name's Carolyn Cox, and I am on the board of Beyond Pesticides and also from the Center for Environmental Health in Oakland, California. Myself and Nelson Carrasquillo here from CATA, the Farmworkers Support Committee, and Bill Duesing from Northwest Organic Farming Association, Northeast, sorry, came from the wrong side of the country, are going to be doing what we call Pesticides 101, everything you ever wanted to know about pesticides, but we're afraid to ask, right? Or not afraid, maybe. This is meant to be a really informal, just kind of introduction to the issue that we're all going to learn a whole lot about this evening and tomorrow. This room is a little bit more formal than really works well for an informal discussion, but just pretend that we're all, sitting around the campfire, and please feel free to ask questions whenever you want. We will try to have a little question period at the end. Yeah, let's go. So I call my presentation 10 Reasons Not to Use Pesticides. And that's a bit of a gimmick, but it's just meant to give kind of a structure to what are some of the most important problems that we know about pesticide use. Can folks see my slides, or do we need to turn down the lights a little?
You're not going to be on the panel, you can do slides.
Yeah, that's better.
No, you got to use the chain.
Whoa. Man, love that technology, right? So I put number 1 on my 10 reasons not to use pesticides, what I think is the very most important thing, which is that pesticides don't solve pest problems. And right now you're all scratching your head and going, what the heck? Isn't that what they're supposed to do? But think about it for a minute. They are really, really good at killing pests sometimes, but what they don't do is actually solve the problem. So one way of looking at this, if they really solved pest problems, right, we wouldn't need to use them anymore because all our pest problems would have been solved back in about 1982 or something. But what's happened? Well, if you look at how much pesticides get used in the United States, it's over 1 billion pounds a year. It's been that way for decades. It's gone down a little tiny bit, but basically stayed the same. So what does solve problems? Well, if you really want to solve a pest problem, you have to change the conditions that encourage that pest. Change the conditions that allow it to survive. So what we're talking about is things like fixing leaky plumbing so there isn't a water source for a pest, caulking so the pest can't get in your house. In an agricultural setting, we would be talking about using varieties that are well adapted to the area where you have your farm, and crop rotations, cover crops, things like that. What you end up with is a system that is actually not hospitable to pests, and so the problem is solved in the long term. Okay, reason number 2, pesticides are hazardous to our health. Now I think probably all of you know that that's true, and that's why you're here. But I think you probably also know that you hear a lot of people say they're safe, especially safe when used as directed. If there'd been a problem, why would we all still be alive, right? We've been using 1 billion pounds a year for decades. So here's a little ammunition that you can give when people tell you that there really isn't a problem with pesticides. First, even the Environmental Protection Agency says pesticides are not good for you. And there's a quote from EPA about what they admit are actual health problems connected with pesticides, ranging from things that happen right now, right when you're first exposed, to things that happen long-term down the road. What I wanted to do was just very quickly, in a minute or two, go through some fairly nerdy stuff about some of our most commonly used pesticides and what we know about their health hazards. So probably everybody's familiar with Roundup. The technical name for the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. It is the most widely used pesticide in the United States. Estimated almost 200 million pounds per year. I'm just give a quick summary of what the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health says about glyphosate. First, that it's a mutagen. It causes genetic damage. Second, it's a reproductive effector. That means it reduces our ability to have healthy children. In the case of glyphosate, causes birth defects. And I love to talk about Roundup because it's the one that everybody says is no problem, right? All those other pesticides cause trouble, but this is the one that wouldn't hurt you at all. Next, I wanted to talk about the most commonly used insecticide in the United States. It is called chlorpyrifos. It's not used in home settings anymore since about 10 years ago, but is really still widely used in agriculture. #1 insecticide used. And again, we consult the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, which basically says very similar to what it's said about glyphosate. It's a mutagen, it damages our genetic material, and it's a reproductive effector. In the case of chlorpyrifos, it affects the development of the nervous system in an unborn or young child. And third, I was going to talk about the most widely used fungicide in the United States. So that's something that you would use for plant diseases. People put it on their roses and that kind of stuff. Also used a lot in agriculture. 9 million pounds of it used every year. And again, here's what the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health says. Again, it's a mutagen, damages our genes. Again, it's a reproductive effector, causes reductions in fertility. And just to add another fun health problem, it's what NIOSH would call a tumorigen, causes cancer. So if somebody tells you that pesticides are safe when used as directed, tell them to come talk to me. Okay? Or give them the same answer that I would. Yeah. Yeah. Legally speaking, fertilizers are not pesticides, although sometimes fertilizers and pesticides are mixed together. That would be your weed and feed and similar products. I try to run away as fast as I can from saying this is worse than that. Usually you're comparing apples to oranges, but just in terms of creating a healthy soil and a healthy garden, a healthy farm, synthetic fertilizers, especially in large amounts, are not really conducive to that. And I think I'll let Bill say more about that, because I'm sure he has a lot to say. Okay, reason number 3. Pesticides are especially problematic for children. And here's just a couple of things that EPA says that you need to think about when you think about pesticides in children. First of all, children drink more water and eat more food for their size than adults do. So if the food and the water has pesticides in it, then they'll be getting more of that than an adult for their size. Also, the way they play, they're crawling around on carpets, they're rolling around on the lawn, all those things expose them to pesticides when they are present. Another thing is that children are growing and developing, so some of their body systems are particularly vulnerable places where they can be impacted by pesticides. And if you think back to the slide about chlorpyrifos, even though it was very nerdy, it said it affected the developing brain. So children are really susceptible to that because their brain is developing. Us, with our concrete brains, don't have to worry quite so much. Reason number 4, pesticides often contaminate food. I wanted to give a few statistics. This is from a program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's called the Pesticide Data Program, and every year they go out and buy food in ordinary supermarkets, places where ordinary people buy food, and they fix it just like ordinary people do. So they peel it or chop it or whatever, and then they test it for pesticide residues. And they usually test, maybe 15 to 20 different kinds of food every year. And here's from the most recent data that's available, 2009. I know that's a long time ago. But what you can see from the pie chart is about 60% of the samples they tested had at least one pesticide or more than that. Is probably about 40% had multiple pesticides, about 20% one pesticide, and about 40% were actually clean, no pesticides. And there's some common foods which you may be really surprised to know about. Strawberries, 96% of the samples they tested had at least one pesticide. Enjoy your strawberries, folks. Just buy organic. 92% of potato samples had at least one pesticide. Pesticides are particularly harmful for farmers and farm workers. So clearly, most pesticides are used in agriculture if you look at by weight, and farmers and farm workers are on the front lines of that use. And this guy is well dressed to protect himself from pesticides. He's probably still being exposed, but I think Nelson will tell you that actually most people don't get that much protection when they're working with pesticides. So, and I just wanted to give you a couple examples of the kinds of studies that, we have some really remarkable studies that are going on right now looking at pesticide exposure and farm workers and farmers. So this is a study called Chamacos, Center for Health Assessment of Mothers and Children of Salinas. That's the lettuce basket of California. In 2002, they looked at pregnant moms. They've been following their children ever since. And what they found is that the moms with the higher exposures to insecticides had kids that were more likely to have ADHD. So these kids are going to have a harder time at school, all those things that are connected with ADHD. And that's a burden that they're going to have to live with because of what their mom was exposed to. About 40% of the moms were farm workers themselves. Most of the rest were spouses of farm workers. Another really big study, it's called Agricultural Health Study, been going on, I think it's actually almost 20 years now, found amazing health effects linked to use of pesticides, including cancer, asthma, diabetes, depression, heart attacks, and a much longer list. So again, if people tell you that pesticides don't cause health problems, tell them to, talk to the government that's doing these studies. Pesticides are hazardous to pets. There's been a few things that happened lately. Spot-on flea treatments, you may have seen them in the news over the last few years. They're supposed to help the pet, but they actually make pets sick. And this is just one of my favorite studies. It's really old now, but they looked at cancer in little cute Scottish Terriers and whether or not that lawn where the Scottish Terrier lived had been treated with lawn care chemicals. And the risk of cancer in the Scottish Terrier was higher if the lawn had been treated with pesticides. Yeah.
You know, when we use that, and I really do believe in the study, so often the industry has a particular answer about why it wasn't valid, as they do with many of our studies, of course, but never any of their own. But I'm just wondering what response you might have in response to their typical responses on that one.
So are you talking about like the Chamaco study and the agriculture?
The Scottish Terrier one.
Which one?
The Scottish Terrier.
Oh, the dogs.
Yeah.
You know, that dog study was done by, you know, professors at a veterinary school, and as far as I know, it stood the test of time. Like, there haven't been a lot of criticisms of the methods or the results. It's a really sound study.
I agree, but we've had people question that study, and I was always like, why? You know, so I just wanted to be able to give them a better response because I didn't have a good one.
I guess the usual criticism is that studies, in order to determine like cause and effect, like these pesticides cause this cancer, you need to do a study in a laboratory with little rats or whatever. You can't do a real live study with people or pets. And so that would be the common criticism. And you know, my response is, let's do both. We do have laboratory studies showing there are problems. And now that we see them in real life too, that should make us just even more worried. Okay, Terry's telling me that I need to go really fast. So lots of pesticides in water. U.S. Department of Agriculture studied drinking water in towns, in farming areas that get their water out of rivers, found 40 different pesticides in towns across the country. The U.S. Geological Survey has also tested streams all over the country for pesticides, and typically between 90 and 100% of the samples that they take, they find pesticides. So they're everywhere. Pesticides are not good for fish and birds, and I think I should just click through this really fast. It's the same pesticides I talked before. None of them are good for fish or birds. 2 seconds to just give a little moment to Rachel Carson, who was so so able to see the problems connected with pesticides long before most people did. And just quickly, 2 more things. Most people think that the government tests pesticides. This is not true. Pesticide testing is mostly done by the companies that make and sell and profit from the pesticides. So just think about it. Who profits from chemicals? It's these guys. Who test pesticides? Just the same guys. Imagine that. They never find any problems. Are we surprised? And one last thing, which I just gotta say, pesticides have many, many secrets. But one that I'm particularly concerned about is that for virtually all pesticides, there are ingredients which pesticide companies don't tell you about. They go by the name of inert ingredients or other ingredients. They can be really hazardous and problematic, and we have no way of knowing what they are right now. So I think I've used more than my 15 minutes, but thank you for your patience. And we're going to bring Bill up next.
He says I should use this mic, so let me do that.
Let's turn this one off.
What do I got to do? Escape. And shrink that. And then mine is right here. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here. It's great for my organization to be a sponsor of this event, and Connecticut NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association in Connecticut, shares the 30th anniversary year. We had our 30th anniversary conference at the beginning of March, so it feels like we're on the same path. I'd just like to add something to what Carolyn said about the testing, which seems really relevant to me, is that apparently the pesticides are tested primarily on healthy adult males. And when I speak to people, it resonates because if you look around, that's a very small percentage of the population. So,
Just to be clear, the laboratory tests are done on animals of both sexes. Some of them do lifetime, starting with children. Some do just adults.
okay. So, let me see if I can move ahead here. I want to start with organic principles because, you know, if you're not going to use pesticides, and I learned in 1972, I'd read enough that I shouldn't use pesticides and started off actually working against 2,4-D when I discovered that people were spreading it on their lawns. I'd learned through agricultural newspapers from the Midwest how bad it was out there, and it seemed to me stupid to put something like that on our lawns, especially if we were going to need to grow food there in the future. It's hard to believe that now, 40 years later, we're still putting 2,4-D on our lawns. We're slow learners, I guess. It really is tough to make change. But if we're going to change, not going to use pesticides, we need to use organic methods. We need to do something other than just stop using pesticides. And I'd like to point out this simple version of what organic principles are, is we're going to use nature's methods. Nature's going to win. We can work with nature and be, you know, have an environment we can live in, or we can keep fighting nature the way we are, and we'll be in big trouble. And then we want to pay attention to the whole system. Ask where things come from, where they go, and what are the effects at each end. And that sort of covers a lot when you think about what you're doing, and we'll see how it fits in with organic strategies. It's also holistic, and the more and more I think about this and pay attention to what's going on, we really need holistic solutions. You know, we need to solve our agriculture and solve our health crisis with common solutions that work both, that are good for human health and the environmental health. And once you start understanding the organic principles and the way nature works, you see that they really work together. Working with nature, this is what nature does. On her own, she moves towards greater biodiversity. We'll see how critical that is important. And that biodiversity provides increased resilience to environmental insult. Nature moves towards increased organic matter, more stuff building up in the soil and in the biosphere. And that organic matter stores carbon and fights climate change. Nature also moves towards greater structural complexity because you have more different organisms that are relating to each other in more different ways. And finally, all of that ends up with increased metabolic stability, which is really what health is, or self-regulating systems. And all the long-term studies that have done comparing organic and conventional practices in agriculture have shown that organic practices work at least as good as conventional in average years, and when the environment is stressed, organic systems shine. They do better because they have that metabolic stability. They don't require that constant input of materials. If we ask the U.S. Department of Agriculture what organic agriculture is, you get this wonderful definition. It's an ecological production management system that promotes and enhances biodiversity, biological cycles, and soil biological activity based on minimal use of off-farm inputs and on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony. And the primary goal of organic agriculture is to optimize the health and productivity of interdependent communities of soil life, plants, animals, and people. So really, organic agriculture should be our goal and is a sort of strategy to get towards a sustainable future. The International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, whose principles have been adopted by the NOFA Interstate Council. NOFA is an organization with 7 chapters in the Northeast, and the NOFA Organic Land Care Program. And these principles are, as you can see there, health, ecology, fairness, and care. Seem to me like some pretty good principles. And let me just point out, this is a good opportunity. We at NOFA have an organic land care program. There's a brochures up here which you can pick up, and they tell you about our other publications, including the standards for organic land care, which are very full of good information. They're available online for free, or you can order them there. And they just last year were approved by the IFOAM into the IFOAM family of standards, so internationally recognized as good organic land care standards. And there are a lot of other aspects to that program, including this wonderful consumer homeowner booklet, Introduction to Organic Lawns and Yards, which also you can connect through that brochure. I like to show this because it's, it's the big picture. We live on this planet. And, if you go to the doctor, he'll take your vital signs, your blood pressure, your sugar levels, your cholesterol, your heart rate, blood pressure, and give you some readout about how your health is. In 2009, 24 scientists got together to see what would be the equivalent thing for our planet. They found these 9 areas that are around the outside. They determined a safe zone, represented here by that green circle in the middle. And they found 3 things which are very much outside the safe zone. The first is climate change. If you want to be really scared, pay attention to what's happening with climate change. The second over here is the nitrogen cycle. You mentioned fertilizer. We've doubled the global flow of nitrogen. Excess nitrogen causes insect feeding, causes weedy growth in large scale and small scale, and causes diseases. It also causes eutrophication in Long Island Sound, not far from here, and many other estuaries. It's connected, I'm sure, in part with the dead zone south of New Orleans. So you asked if nitrogen fertilizers are a problem. They're a big problem. We need to cut them way back for our planet, if for no other reason. And then the third thing, which is really connected with that, is the biodiversity loss, which is, oh, thank you. The biodiversity loss here, which is the worst of all. And that's where we get our resilience, our resistance to environmental stresses. We've got climate change, which is environmentally stressing us. Too much nitrogen, which is environmentally stressing us. At the same time, we're losing species rapidly, losing our resilience in the environment. The nitrogen, when you add nitrogen to the soil, it releases greenhouse gases, which make the climate change worse. It also reduces the biodiversity in the soil. Climate change worsens the biodiversity. All of these are very serious problems which are very connected to the way we eat, the way we grow our food, and all of them can be addressed directly on a backyard scale or a farm scale by organic strategies based on the organic definition there from the USDA and using nature's methods. This is probably the biggest pesticide problem, aside from perhaps lawns in this country, the 80 or plus million acres of corn, which are mostly now genetically modified. The genetic modification encourages more pesticide use. Most of them are Roundup resistant, which means, or Roundup ready, which means they're sprayed with Roundup, but after 15 years of doing that, the Roundup's not working so well, so they need to spray more Roundup and more Roundup, so it's getting more tolerance for Roundup in our food supply. And now they're wanting to put 2,4-D resistance in this, so now they can spray the corn with Roundup, and then if the Roundup doesn't kill the weeds, they'll spray it with 2,4-D. Just this morning, I learned of 2 more pesticides connected with the large-scale growing of corn. One is a neonicotinoid, which has been widely pointed at as the culprit in the decline of bees. Apparently, most of the corn seeds in this country are treated with the neonicotinoid and may be very connected with the death of bees. In France, I understand that they used to treat the sunflower seeds with this pesticide, this very powerful neonicotinoid, that planted in the ground, the sunflower would grow all season, it would make a flower, and then when the bee used the pollen or the nectar from the flower, it would be poisoned. It's that powerful, that strange a substance. So that's one of the things that's on all the things, in addition to the Roundup and whatever else. And now the other pesticide, other genetically modified trait is to produce Bt toxin in every cell of the corn plant. Bt is a pesticide that's allowed on organic farms. It's from a soil bacteria. It kills small worms, but it's just used occasionally on the outside of plants in the BT corn, it's in all the plants, and now it's in most of us because it comes through the food system. 93% of women, pregnant women tested in Canada had this BT toxin in their blood from the BT corn. The second pesticide I learned about this morning is they use anhydrous ammonia to fertilize the corn. They put that on in the fall sometimes. The Earth's response to all that nitrogen, anhydrous ammonia, very strong chemical, into the soil is to produce bacteria which reduce that nitrogen and put it back into the air. You know, it's the Earth's cleansing mechanism. So now they've got another pesticide which kills those soil organisms so the nitrogen fertilizer stays in the soil. So it's just amazing, the story of what's so bad about this. And then, of course, that releases greenhouse gases and many other things. And reduces biodiversity. There's so many things. It may be connected with the decline of the monarch butterflies. And the end result is we get these wonderful, the iconic American meal made from 3 different confined animal feeding operations, all the animals fed with genetically modified grain. There's no idea what the results of that is. And all of that genetically modified grain has more pesticides on it than it would if it weren't GMO. But there's some good news. Rodale Farm in northeastern Pennsylvania for 30 years has done a farming systems trial comparing organic and conventional practices. After 30 years, and at some point in the last 10 years or so, they switched to using GMO corn in the conventional plots. And this is what they found after 30 years. The yields, the organic, which is the green, the yields are higher. You know, not that much, but higher than the conventional yield, the gray. Look at the profit. It's at about 3 times as much profit per year, per acre. The energy input, much less with the organic system. And the greenhouse gases, much less. All of these are very good things that we need. So it is possible to do that, but we need the kind of holistic solutions that they've created, including this wonderful 5-year rotation of crops, which includes corn, which uses only one tillage operation. Tillage operation is as damaging to the soil as pesticides and fertilizers are. One tillage operation in 5 years and one application of compost. We really need to cut down on our nutrients, and it's possible. So just 2 operations other than planting and seeding and harvesting from this thing. And one of the ways they do it, again, a wonderful holistic solution. In the fall before they're going to grow corn, they plant hairy vetch, which is a legume which produces a lot of nitrogen. It grows up maybe this tall by the time you want to plant the corn. They roll the hairy vetch down, it becomes the mulch, so it controls the weeds on the corn. Then they split seed the corn there. Also, as it decomposes, it provides the nitrogen. So it's a system which uses nature's methods, which produces what we need. And it is possible. So I think that's the end of it. Yes. Okay.
Did you say the acreage of corn?
It's about 80 billion.
80 billion?
Million. And it's all that information is like, and you know that the corn farmers spend about over $800 an acre to grow an acre of corn, I just heard today. And they get about $900 for that corn. So we're creating this incredible large-scale environmental damage, dead zones and climate change and polluted wells in order to get, $20 or $30 an acre or $100 an acre. It's really crazy. Yes?
What would the organic equivalent be? Like how much would be the input and what would be the...
I don't know if it's done. The Rodale, probably some information in their farming systems trial. If you Google that, it'll come right up. Rodale farming systems trial. And it's a whole long report. Other questions? Let's let Nelson talk and then we'll be all
We'll
together.
talk again. Good afternoon to everybody. I have a kind of a slightly different presentation. I'm not using PowerPoint, so I am technologically limited. So I'm gonna try and present a picture of the context of farm workers from our perspective. So, do you hear me fine in the back? Okay. I represent CATA, no? Farmworkers Support Committee. We are a farm worker organization based in New Jersey. We work in Pennsylvania and in Kennett Square, the mushrooms, and Reading, meatpacking areas. And we also work in Salisbury, Maryland, around nurseries and housing. Being a migrant farm worker organization, most of our members are undocumented. So for us, the farm worker equal undocumented is almost a true point, and has many things to do in terms of what is the reality of the farm workers today. In the early 90s, most of our members began talking to us in regards to the issues that they were facing in the fields, no? What happened was that many would, at that time, were able to travel back and forth from their home country, let's say from New Jersey to Mexico and back. And what they were finding was that symptoms that they had at a certain moment, which could not be treated while they were in New Jersey or in Pennsylvania, given that access to healthcare issues. When they went back to their home communities and went to doctors over there, they found out that many of the symptoms that they were having were related to exposure to pesticides. The problem that they were having was that there was no direct link. No, there was not a connection about it. So for us, we tried to, during those years, to advocate, no, for the importance of trying to do research as to find out what was those effects, no, to make that link. And I think it goes to the question that the young lady over there was asking. And the problem was that in terms of studies, not enough studies were being made to look at the linkage between health effects of pesticides. And one of the reasons that they were talking about was that many workers during a season would be exposed to a series of different working environments and different pesticides. So they were not able to analyze one pesticide vis-a-vis another pesticide. So we were talking in terms of okay, but then don't do the study based on one pesticide. So let's do a study on the accumulative effects of pesticides. Not only that you have them being added to your body, but then to look at the possible effects of different pesticides on it and the accumulative effects of all of them. To my knowledge, and you might correct me, Caroline, I don't think that those type of studies are being made. So that gives way to opens up the uncertainty, no? That there is the argument that that the pesticides are not necessarily harmful. It was then in the early 90s. I truly believe it is stronger now, those type of arguments, because the food system is reliant on the use of chemicals, no? With chemicals, I am talking of fertilizers and pesticides, and in order to make the production that this country has. So for us, the challenge was how we would train workers to protect themselves, how we would enable the workers to understand the circumstance and by being aware of that, so that they could take protective measures. No, we all know, no, that for example, you have to wear protective clothes. So you have to have long sleeves, and you have to make sure that when you go back from the fields to the camp, that you wash those clothes every day. So there's measures that you can take. But then the problem is, when the farmer is going to tell you that they sprayed a field, and then supposedly by law you have to wait about 4 hours a minimum. Then they ask you to go into the field. But then there is no, that's the time period, the waiting period of 4 hours is something that is not necessarily based on, I hesitate to say that, science-based, no? Because you go into the field, and many of those plants are still wet. And the residues, they still get into the closest. So it's a very difficult point of measure. So that was then, that was today, that is today. Now, I cannot say that in terms of agriculture and the practice of agriculture, there has been a significant change. And I wanted to highlight that because in this past week, there is two things that drew my attention that I wanted to share with you. For example, the Department of Agriculture requires farmers to keep a log on pesticides use, the pesticides that they use, the time and the place where they use those. Now, that regulation is being dismissed. They will not have to keep track of that. Secondly, the issue about children in the fields, then there is an effort to strengthen that regulation, but the pushback is that it's not going to be strengthened. On the contrary, it's going to continue the way it is. So children are going to continue to be in the fields. The problem in our mind is that in terms of farm workers, and let me link that to another issue. No? When you are in the field, you have to pick crops when the time, when harvesting time. You have to pick crops at a high rate of movement, and you have to assume body positions that are kind of difficult to maintain, and you're supposed to do that sun up, sundown. No. The risk, no, the ergonomics of it makes it so that the ones that can keep pace of that would be young people. You see, and the young people who are migrant not necessarily know or understand what are the need for protections that they have to take. So they receive a training in the worker protection standard by seeing a video that lasts about half an hour, 20 to 30 minutes, and supposedly that video will train them for the next 5 years in how to protect themselves. So when you're under the pressure in the fields that you have to pick crops and you have to do them real quick, either whether it's apples, whether it is tomatoes or potatoes or whatever, that you have to do it by hand picking, but you're not going to be worried about taking safety measures, no? Especially if you're young. So what happens is that that a lot of farm workers are being affected, no? And eventually through the years, they have problems. I want to make that link because in Reading, Pennsylvania, we're working with a group of workers in a packing house. And they are working what they call the line. And in that line, they are cutting chicken and turkeys by hand, by scissors. And many of them are having problems with their hands, so with their body, no? They have problems. So I want to highlight that because it is an ergonomic problem that is related to the way work is done. Regardless of the place it is, whether in the fields or whether in a packing house or a nursery. And there is a common thread through that, no? Migrant workers, undocumented workers, young people who not necessarily have knowledge about what is the protections of the things that they need to do. Then last week, two weeks ago, I went to a hearing to provide testimony on wage, minimum wage in New Jersey. All the employers that testified in that hearing were against raising the minimum wage. And we're not talking living wage, minimum wage, from $7.25 to $8.50. The Farm Bureau testified against it, of course. And the point is that what they continuously say is that the industry is over-regulated, that there is no need for over-regulation, so you have to take measures to make it easier for employers, and in this case in particular farmers, to do their business in a way that will enable them to be profitable. The problem with that, give me a time check, the problem with that is, for farmers in particular, is that the way the pricing system works, their profits is not generated from selling their produce. Their profit is generated from the saving that they can make in their labor. You see, so because they don't set the price for the pesticides that they have to buy, or the chemicals that they use for fertilizers, or the machinery, or anything like that. They have to buy at the price the market gives them, and they have to make it work from what they can control. And what they can control is the workforce. And because of that, we have a system, we talk about it in terms of a food chain system, no? From the field to the table, in which we have to take a measure as to what is the common thread through that. What I mean is that you have to look at farm workers from the point of view that they are the canaries in the mine. So if the health of the farm worker is compromised, that the health of that produce that is being worked at the fields is compromised too. So at least from our point of view of a farm worker organization. So for us, the way the food system is at this moment, that is reliant on the uses of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, is not an alternative that in the long term will mean the health of people. So we have, as an organization, advocated for many years that we need to change the food system for better ways, no? And we advocate for organic. I don't know if I'm stepping on your. We envision a system that the organic produce, the farms be close to urban centers, so that the movement of goods should not take that long to get to the consumer's table. We are looking for a system that is based on the respect of the land and is on the respect of the human being. Because if we take care of that, then our children will be ensured that they will have a healthy and a long living life. I don't want to grow old and be sick. So I don't want to live longer and be sick because of all the chemicals that I have in my body. So I feel that we need to change that, you know. And each one of us from where we are, we need to step up and do whatever we can. Okay. There you go.
Questions. And I think it's best if you ask a question, if you say it into the microphone so everybody can hear. And there's one microphone back there, and I've got this one. Who would like to start us off?
thank all three of you for everything you're doing. My question is, I've been involved with the terrible West Nile virus plague, I think it's 12 years ago, where they wanted to aerial spray resmethrin, not a great actor. And then also most recently, chlordane being accused of being used so widely in termite control that had to be the only reason why a whole neighborhood has contaminated wells, and we're all doing research about that. My point is, if you could each comment on if our governors, our regulators, don't always understand fully the harm that this can cause and present it to laymen on the local level, and our legislators, who are mostly laymen, are there any states in the country where you have found that the staffing is such that that they can help other states that maybe their staff isn't quite as progressive on this issue of pesticide harm, and also then pass the word to their legislators, the media? Everyone expects the state governments to know more, and oftentimes we're finding that ain't the truth.
I don't know much about outside of Connecticut, and there are some very good people working in Connecticut at the state level, and maybe some people who aren't. Haven't met them yet.
I think this is the right time for a great plug for Beyond Pesticides. So Beyond Pesticides is a national organization, but really, when we say that, what it means is it's made up of people all over the country that are working on pesticide issues. So they could maybe put you in touch with people from other parts of the country, other states that are working on similar issues. So I don't know if you've called Stephanie at Beyond Pesticides, but I would definitely give it a try. Next question.
This is a question for Nelson. I was wondering if there are similar organizations like yours that you're affiliated with migrant workers and farm workers. You're from the East Coast area. Are there other organizations that are your brother and sister organizations, or is it scattered coordination?
To my knowledge, in Vermont, there is a farm work organization that is relatively new. They have about 4 years, and they're in that process, no, do that. There was another farm work organization in the state of New York, but then it fizzled because it's, as you would know, it's very, very hard to maintain continuity. And what is left of it is in the Rochester area. There was an effort of organizing farm workers in Maine that also fizzled at that time with the workers of the forest workers. So to my knowledge, there might be smaller organizations, but not necessarily we are aware of them.
There is a new thing called the Agricultural Justice Project, which Nelson's organization and my organization have collaborated on with several others to be able to certify food as fair throughout the food system.
Yeah. And on the national scope, on the West Coast we have United Farm Workers, and in the Midwest we have the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, and I always forget the name of the group in Florida, but
there's two organizations in Florida: Farm Workers Association of Florida, the Association of Farm Workers in Florida, and the Immokalee Workers in Florida.
More on the West Nile virus question. Thank you for bringing that up. I haven't looked at it or thought about it for a while, but there have been reports of mass lobster die-offs in, I think, Long Island Sound, which someone may know about. I live in Maine, where, of course, there's a vigorous lobster industry, and if we can find natural allies among certain industries that are involved in fishing and lobstering, that may be a way to organize to combat the spraying efforts.
A good number of the lobsters' immune systems have been seriously affected, about a third of the population, and there are only 2 lobster men in the Sound left, and which is, of course, in itself a very sad thing. But what they have really come to conclusion that it is the West Nile virus that is being sprayed in the watershed close to the Sound.
I've recently experienced a situation where in our town, someone was trying to close down an organic farmer, and they used a whole lot of claims about how in organic farming, certain pesticides are used and that they can be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. When I looked into the source of the claims, it was from the Hudson Institute, which some of you may know is a think tank that's hostile to all environmental causes, and one of their big funders is Monsanto, Dow, et cetera. However, Bill, the reason for my question is you mentioned the Bt toxin that is used in small amounts, you said judiciously in organic farming, but what they've done is they've now placed that toxin, they've genetically modified the corn, and that when it's in the corn, it's very dangerous. When it's outside the corn, it's not. Are there other cases that you know of? Because this position paper of the Hudson Institute is getting play in the press. People are hearing about it. Is it because of things like the Bt, you know, that they're...
I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of untruths about organic farm. They will say that organic farmers use manure. Organic farms are the only one where manure is actually regulated. Conventional farmers can use manure any way they want. Organic farmers need to compost it or put it on a long time period before the crop is harvested. You know, all pesticides are dangerous. There's some that are from some natural products that are usable on organic farms, organic gardens. I think most farmers try as hard as they can not to use them. When climate throws stuff at us, sometimes, you know, a lot of farmers use sulfur on their tomatoes. Not a lot. Most of them didn't want to, but some did when we had the late blight coming through here a couple of years ago.
So, Terry, would you like to do the 30-second description of what the process for something to be approved as a input onto an organic farm?
Well,
No, it should be all right.
okay. Well, it's to be approved, the NOSB has to determine first that it's needed, and that it doesn't cause unreasonable. It doesn't. I don't want to say that. It doesn't cause various adverse effects. It doesn't hurt people's health. It doesn't harm biodiversity, and that it's consistent with the principles of organic agriculture. Did it hit things?
Yeah, are you with Omri? Or close to that? No. Beyond, okay, all right.
There's a federal law that regulates what can be used on organic farms, and it doesn't prohibit the use of pesticides, but they do have to go through this really serious evaluation process that's done by the National Organic Standards Board, which is composed of people who eat, people who care about the environment, organic farmers, organic food processors, and others,
Yep.
scientists, so that yes, it is true that there are some pesticides that are allowed to be used in organic farming, but it's a very small list, and it's very much more carefully evaluated than what's used in conventional agriculture.
And perhaps more widely used as the larger far-away farms than in the ones that are closer to where people live, the ones around the cities.
And if I may say, and I am not an expert in anywhere they are, but as I understand it, those are standards put on by USDA, as opposed to that do not necessarily represent standards made by organic farmers who are more engaged.
Lots of questions.
Yeah, I'm the Sierra Club State Legislative Chair. Perhaps the biggest problem that we have trying to run legislation, especially with regards to school grounds, is that the applicators keep coming back year after year trying to sell the state on the idea that IPM solves the problems. And I wonder if any of you want to comment on whether IPM really is beneficial at times or whether it's really problematic. I'm sure Bill has something to say about this. But I just wanted to make sure that comes up during the conference.
Okay,
It's such a large problem for us.
In Connecticut, yes. IPM is Integrated Pest Management, which began as a movement away from pesticides or to use less pesticides. It's a system where a farmer who might have before sprayed every 10 days or every week for a pest has to scout the fields very carefully, determine that the pest is there, determine that it's there at a level that's going to cause economic harm, and then you do the, up to that point, you've done all the other strategies you can do to control pest, healthy soil, rotation, other things that are more available to organic farmers than others. You've done all that, and then you can spray some pesticides. So it came on as a movement to move away from pesticides. In this case, in Connecticut, they want to introduce it to bring pesticides back to the schoolyards.
Yeah. And I think it's probably important to point out that there is not a legal definition of integrated pest management in the same way that there's a legal definition of organic. And there aren't the same kind of requirements for certification and sort of auditing that there are with organic. So there's a lot that can go under the name of IPM. I'm from California, and I was at in California, the pest control operators who work on your home are regulated by the Structural Pest Control Board. That's similar in many states. And I was at a meeting talking about this issue of integrated pest management and certification, and one of the pest control operators said, well, you know, I'm an IPM company, but when somebody comes to me and says, I got spiders in my garden shed, and I tell them that I can deal with it with an IPM approach and it will cost them $1,000, or I can set off a fogger and it'll be $50, they're always going to choose the fogger. But I make sure that that's IPM, because after I set off the fogger, I give them a list of the things that they need to do, you know, the screens and the caulking and the vacuuming to keep the spiders out of their shed. And I said, you know, I don't think that's IPM. I don't think that fits the definition of IPM. But that's the kind of argument that you're going to get into because there isn't a consistent legal definition and certifying auditing agencies to make sure that that definition is being followed.
So is it okay if I just follow up on some of what we found with IPM? We were working on a law in New Hampshire to keep pesticides off school properties. And so we looked up a whole bunch of definitions of IPM. We found you know, a good 20 from Monsanto down to real honest people who really do use pesticides as the absolute last method. And one of my friends who used to own one of the largest New England lawn pesticide companies has told me, as have many other former applicators, that IPM really does mean business as usual, but you put a paragraph up on your website that pretty much says the sort of thing that you were saying. And part of the problem is that, you know, you might have people talking about IPM and policy, like in the town where Susan and I are from. There's this fabulous IPM policy, absolute last thing. Well, what happened to me is I actually got pesticides sprayed on me during this IPM policy because we were just trying to get rid of a few dandelions, and oops, we forgot that we had contracted with this company, kind of thing. So my experience has been in looking at all these things in different states that IPM really means, you know, it's been co-opted by the industry a lot, and honest IPM, as it was intended, is a fabulous thing, but for the way it's really used right now, it really is being not used appropriately. And what it ends up meaning is just pesticides.
Great. You know what? There's a lot of really good food and drinks waiting for us out there in the lobby. And what I was going to suggest is that we should keep this dialogue going, and that we'll be here for a few minutes to you know, talk to anybody who wants to come up and ask a question individually. But why don't we go out and enjoy the refreshments and keep these questions and discussions coming, because that's what the conference is all about.